Were Jeff and Abed the dynamic duo of Community? You might think that's a dumb question, and that's fair, though harsh, but Community has a breakout duo in the form of Troy and Abed. They're the show's JD and Turk, and that it's guy love. That's all it is. Jeff, meanwhile, pairs up mostly with Annie or Britta. Removing any of these duos loses the show a lot of merch and ship videos. But is the same true for Jeff and Abed? After my 2009 rewatch of the show, I noticed that a lot of thematically relevant moments actually center around Jeff and Abed. When you look at the whole series, the show's changes and growth is often reflected in the way these two characters interact. Is this just because they're the most similar to show creator Dan Harmon, or is something else at play here? I asked the questions, so I'll make the video. Them's the rules! The show actually starts its story off on a conversation between Jeff and Abed. That could be a point in favor of my point, though it could also mean I just make really simple connections. And Community was a completely different show when it started. Dan Harmon had a completely different idea of what he wanted to do with each character and how he wanted to pair them up that ultimately ended up changing when the show got rolling. Troy and Pierce were supposed to be the slapstick duo, Annie and Shirley both zero in on the same things, and it seems like early on the show was pitching Jeff and Abed as the duo. In Introduction to Film, Jeff gets involved in Abed's B story despite preaching to Britta that she should be doing the exact opposite. Jeff also moves in with Abed, and we learn that they're both very similar people when they're broken down to their studs in home economics. Unlike those other early pairings, though, Jeff and Abed's duo does not fade away as the season carries on. In investigative journalism, Jeff invests in Abed's references as a way to stroke his own ego, but Abed ultimately ends up telling Jeff that he can't always be the chill guy, and reminding Jeff that that's what being a leader is all about. It's the episode that really solidifies the dynamic between the two. Jeff sees Abed as a sidekick who doesn't really understand the situation, up until the point where Abed sees more humanity in Jeff than Jeff can in himself. This dynamic is reinforced when Abed coaches Jeff through returning a drunk dial to Britta in romantic expressionism. Jeff originally sees Abed as a peculiar guy who doesn't really get the situation, but ultimately Abed shows more understanding of Jeff than anybody else. Then again, in physical education, Jeff spends the whole episode trying to protect Abed from the group, when Abed's the one who ends up teaching Jeff that it doesn't really matter what other people think of him. It's thanks to Abed and the charisma falling out of his butt that Jeff learns the lesson for the episode. It's a well-worn dynamic by the time contemporary American poultry comes around and subverts it, making Abed the one with all the power and Jeff the outcast. It's here the characters admit to each other they lack something the other has. Abed can't connect with people like Jeff does, but Jeff doesn't understand people as well as Abed does. When you think about how unchangeable both characters act throughout the show, it's cool to see that they've already started changing each other. But every season of Community ends up being different from the last one, and by the beginning of the second season, the show is moving away from soapy stuff and into more conceptual territory. It marks this change with Jeff and Abed, and in doing so, adds a new layer to their dynamic: tension. Anthropology 101 crescendos with a fight between the group that ends when Jeff says that Abed can't tell life from TV, and Abed bites back saying that Jeff isn't likable enough to be on TV. The argument reflects both where the show is starting its season and where the characters are in their relationship. The show is setting its foot down on being abnormal, using Abed to say we're not gonna do what a normal sitcom would do, and instead, we're gonna do a bunch of weird stuff. But it also picks up on the dynamic between Jeff and Abed and moves it forward. Jeff is now realizing he's not actually a likable guy, and Abed's realizing that his TV lens is imperfect. Both of those traits end up having to be reckoned with in the coming years. However, Season 2 does back off their dynamic a lot, using it more as color throughout the episodes rather than focusing episodes in on it. Episodes like Cooperative Calligraphy start off with Abed calling it a bottle episode, only for Jeff to join in and call it a bottle episode, and episodes like Celebrity Pharmacology see Jeff messing up by texting Britta's cousin and then immediately roping Abed in. The dynamic isn't forgotten by the show, and is the focus for the episode Critical Film Studies, where Abed's worried that he and Jeff are drifting apart. When Abed makes the whole episode like My Dinner with Andre, Jeff calls into question whether or not Abed is ultimately selfish because he's constantly trying to please himself. But Abed retorts that he wasn't trying to please himself and only did the whole episode because he was worried about him and Jeff not hanging out as much. Though Jeff ends the episode saying that Abed doesn't need to grow for them to stay friends, they both do show here that they've grown a little. Jeff is now able to open up to Abed, albeit under hilarious circumstances, and proves that he ultimately does care about Abed and Abed being happy. The third season is even lighter on Jeff and Abed episodes, but their dynamic does become a theme across the season. Remedial Chaos Theory hinges its entire plot on a scheme of Jeff's and how Abed interprets it. Jeff is openly dismissive to Abed, saying there's multiple timelines, but Abed ultimately knows what Jeff is doing and is able to point it out by the end of the episode. It fulfills their dynamic perfectly. Then the ending of Pillows and Blankets adds another layer in showing Jeff really subsumes himself into Troy and Abed's reality. He takes his friends seriously, and in doing so, he becomes a lot more like Abed. Abed, in turn, makes up with Troy and is able to move on from the events of the episode pointed in the right direction by Jeff. They're becoming more like each other through their arcs, and this becomes important when in Introduction to Finality, Abed faces losing his best friend and not being okay without him. But he snaps out of his mental breakdown by a classic Winger speech when we learn Jeff has changed during his time at Greendale, and now believes helping other people is the right thing to do. It's the resolution both to Jeff's series arc so far and Abed's season-long arc about whether or not they would be okay after Greendale, the resolution being that they would be okay for having met each other.
Oh, that is a lot better. I don't know what it is. This video in particular is hard to put together. I'm having to reread a lot of lines. Not a lot of them sound real to me anymore. So I decided to do a laydown. The thing about the fourth season of Community is that it's got a pretty wretched reputation. It's been explored by hundreds of better essayists before me about why it was bad and what was bad about it, and Dan Harmon himself lovingly coined it the gas leak year, and then made it canon to the show that the entire season took place during a gas leak at Greendale. Harmon had been fired after season 3, and he took with him a lot of the original plans for the show. It wasn't always going to last at Greendale. It was going to transition over into the other parts of their lives and have them just be like a group of friends. That's why Annie and Abed and Troy moved in together, and why Jeff, Shirley, and Pierce were all going to start a sandwich shop together, or whatever that was. But Harmon left, and he took a lot of those ideas with him. But I always felt like the season's agreed upon status as an abomination was a little bit of an exaggeration. I mean, it's obviously missing Dan Harmon, but I don't say that to mean that it's not good anymore. I just mean it's missing his signature sort of self-referential, self-loathing style. His mark as a showrunner is gone, and the ship is clearly under the command of different captains who, by the way, put out really bad DVD commentary. Still, even though I love Dan Harmon's stuff, and I love knowing that he was working on something, him being taken off the project wasn't really a death blow for me. I mean, he did let go of the reins on Rick and Morty, and that show did fine afterwards, although he only stopped being the showrunner. He stayed as a writer, which is what he didn't do on Community, is stay in any capacity, so maybe that's the point against Community. It doesn't help that Chris McKenna left with him, another predominant voice in the writer's room, and the guy who played Starburns, who is also a writer. Still, we can't ignore it. It's the last season with the entire original cast, and it maintains a lot of where the story was going. It kept writers from the previous season. It lost some of them, but it kept others, and the people it kept knew the show really well. Megan Gans is somebody who I think is a particular note because she always wrote great episodes of Community and then went on to work on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia pretty heavily. So she was there and doing it. I guess I bring her up specifically because it's her episode that really matters to this essay. Jeff and Abed are mainly shown as a duo in none of the episodes now that I really think about it. But in the finale, Jeff goes through this whole Abed-style mental breakdown, except for you don't know that it's Jeff going through an Abed-style mental breakdown until the end. You think a lot of things. The show could just be doing something crazy. It does that. But you also bet if it's gonna be a mental breakdown, it's gonna be Abed's, because every concept episode that is a mental breakdown, inspired concept is usually inspired by Abed. So the fact that Megan Gantz is the first one to tell a concept episode through the lens of Jeff, and she knew the characters well enough to know that it would be a potent reveal that it was Jeff dreaming it up, not Abed, kind of shows me that she had an idea of how the character's arc was supposed to go and where they were starting to trade. And I mean, it comes back up. Jeff goes through more stuff like that in the following seasons. So it's important here. You should know that, I guess, that happened. Season 4 of Community, everybody.
So, Season 5 jumps from there to restructure both Jeff and Abed's relationship and the relationship for the group in general. Where for the first part of the show, Greendale was kind of like a prison for Jeff and endless possibilities for Abed, it switches now, where Jeff chooses to be at Greendale, albeit reluctantly, and Abed sees Greendale more of a place that's representing everything he's losing. Both of them struggle to deal with this change, and where in the beginning Jeff was protective of Abed and Abed was admiring of Jeff, Jeff now seems to be easily irritated by Abed, and Abed a little bit annoyed that Jeff doesn't get him. Repilot sets this up with its joke about Abed and Jeff's attempt to create a commercial, which is mostly a joke by Chris McKenna that he's been doing for the whole series at this point, where Abed and Troy secretly hate Jeff and will act so in the end tags, but it is interesting and of note here because it's the first time that it really comes out this much in the open between specifically Abed and Jeff, and it sets up again that tension building throughout the rest of the season. While it certainly has its roots in the previous episodes of the show, it seems to mark the transition here to a more antagonistic relationship between the two. G.I. Jeff sees Jeff go through another Abed-style mental breakdown, only a few episodes after Abed's own Abed-style mental breakdown. But where Abed seems to be more rooted in how things are changing at Greendale, Jeff's is more rooted in how they're not. He's turning 40 and he's teaching at Greendale, not where he thought he'd be and not where he wants to be. Or at least that's what he's telling himself at this point in the story. By the season's finale, the two stories are expanded upon, with Basic Sandwich exploring the group finding out that Greendale is about to be shut down and showing how they deal with it. We'd expect Abed to be the one to freak out the most at the shutting down of Greendale. It's Jeff who seems the most shaken by it, almost immediately jumping into a proposal with Britta so that he can try and avoid the fact that he's losing a place that he actually loves. Abed, meanwhile, is being presented as the one losing it, looking for buried treasure with Annie, until they find out that there actually is buried treasure at Greendale. Jeff's the one being unrealistic in his plans to marry Britta because he's in love with Annie, as the end of the episode tells you. It's kind of hard to say that the one not looking for buried treasure is the one behaving irrationally, but that's why I love Community. It sets up the end of their dynamic in Season 6, where the two would be seeing more episodes and more spotlight on the two of them than they've gotten since Season 2. Latter sees Jeff head up a concept episode that Abed's reluctant to join, completing their role reversal from the beginning of the series. Intro to Recycled Cinema ends with Jeff trying to strangle Abed to death because he's upset with how Abed's handling change while he can't. Now it's Jeff who can't handle the reality of their friends leaving, and Abed who has to be the one to help him find his way. And when Jeff gets the chance to repay Abed and help him back to reality, he shows that he's basically lost the ability to do so in basic RV repair and palmistry, with Frankie ending up having to be the one to help Abed help the situation. Jeff's also gotten noticeably more violent with Abed, something that's addressed in the series finale, Emotional Consequences of Broadcast Television. Jeff's season-long struggle to embrace change has left him bitter towards Abed for being able to do so. Abed used to be a vehicle for Jeff to show his kindness to the group, a reason for them all to stay together. Now Abed's ready to leave, and he's let the group go in the process, something that Jeff reacts to by imagining strangling a horde of Abeds. But Jeff's last lesson is to learn to embrace change as well, and he does so by the end of the episode, going in for a second hug with Abed when he's finally ready to let him go, bringing the series full circle on their friendship. But hey, what am I telling you guys this for? You've obviously read Meg Ember's Jeff and Abed, Two Sides of the Same Coin. You didn't? Nobody ever does the homework. I am sick of this. Guys, this is college now. You have to come prepared for class. Behave like adults or don't even bother coming. Anyway, her thesis is that Abed is the hidden part of Jeff, and Jeff is the missing piece of Abed. Going on to say, Abed brings out Jeff's fun and vulnerable side, making the leading man more appealing to the audience by showing them he has more sides to him than the shallow douchebag he lets on. Jeff starts the series as a notably unlikable protagonist, and then he meets Abed. In turn, Abed starts the series never having had friends, and then he meets Jeff. In the article Transforming the Traditional Sitcom, Abed and Community, the author explores the recurring rivalry between the two, describing it as encapsulating a rivalry between the classic sitcom plot that Jeff represents and meta-commentary where Abed's function has been well established. The two's dynamic is representative of the show's balancing act between the normal and the weird, especially, as the author says, towards the beginning of the series. By the end, the representation has grown with the characters, now being about the sitcom's struggle to want to continue versus the creator's knowledge that it's probably time to end. Overall, if the series has a point, it's to embrace whatever situation you're in for what it could be, and keep note while you're around, because you may miss it more than you think. Jeff was ready to blow through his time at Greendale, and Abed wanted it all to be like a movie, but both of them ended up growing more as people because of their time there. They see themselves in each other, and see a lot more about what's going on around them than a lot of the other characters do. They could just be fictional Harmons talking to each other and thus themselves. They could mean more about the world they live in. They could be deities. Abed could be God and Jeff the devil. I'm gonna get to that in a later video. But the way I see it, they're both just two people who desperately needed friends without even realizing it, and come to learn a lot more about themselves through their friendship with each other. Like I said, I rewatch the show a lot, so I like on my rewatches that I get to end on that Jeff and Abed double hug, only to go back and watch them know and meet each other in that order. Okay, I'm done talking about Community. I was on a podcast, my dad's podcast, recently, and I had a lot of fun talking to them about music and other sorts of stuff, so check out the description either for a link to the podcast or a link specifically to the episode, whichever is available to me. Okay, now I'm gonna leave the camera on and let you guys watch me just sit here.